The day I found out about the affair began like any other. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting a soft glow in our kitchen. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, a scent I had come to associate with comfort and routine. My wife, Laura, was bustling about, preparing for her day. A smile stretched across her face, and I felt a sense of ease wash over me. Little did I know that would be the last moment of tranquility I would experience for a long time. I had been working late the night before, buried in spreadsheets and deadlines, when I received an unexpected text from a friend. Saw Laura with the chef last night. Looked pretty cozy. At first, I dismissed it as a joke, a misunderstanding. Laura had always been passionate about food, and the chef she hired, Marco, was a talented man. But as I sat there, the words echoed in my mind, gnawing at me. My heart raced and a pit formed in my stomach. When I confronted her that evening, I expected denial, perhaps an explanation that would soothe my fears. Instead, her face went pale and the truth hung heavy in the air between us like a thick fog. I didn't mean for it to happen," she stammered, her voice trembling. I felt as if the ground had been ripped from beneath me, leaving me suspended in disbelief. My mind raced through memories of our life together, our wedding day, shared laughter, and quiet evenings on the couch. How could she betray me like this? My anger surged, a boiling tide that threatened to drown me. "How could you do this to us, Laura, to me?" I shouted, the hurt spilling out in waves. She tried to reach for me to explain, but I recoiled. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could. I was not just angry, I was shattered. The love I had for her twisted into something grotesque, a mix of sorrow and rage. I stormed out of the house, needing air, needing space to think. Each step felt heavy, as if I were walking through mud. I wandered aimlessly, replaying the moment over and over in my head. The image of her with Marco, laughing and enjoying life while I toiled away in the shadows, consumed me. I questioned every moment I had taken for granted, every meal we had shared, every smile that had once felt genuine. Had it all been a lie? Night fell and I returned home feeling hollow. Laura was waiting for me, tears streaming down her cheeks. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I felt a cold resolve forming within me. If she could betray me so easily, then I had to make a choice. I needed to reclaim my power, to ensure that she understood the weight of her actions. The following morning, I made a decision. I would confront Marco. I needed to understand the extent of their relationship, to lay bare the betrayal that had shattered my world. I would fire him, not just for what he had done, but for the way he had invaded my life. I needed to take control, to turn the tables on this narrative that had spiraled out of my hands. As I drove to the restaurant where Marco worked, my mind raced with questions. Did he know about me? Did he care? The thought of him, a man who had been welcomed into our home cooking meals for my wife, made my blood boil. I arrived at the restaurant, and as I stepped inside, the familiar scent of spices and sautéed vegetables hit me. It felt like a cruel joke. I spotted Marco behind the counter, his back turned to me as he plated a dish. I approached him, my heart pounding. "Marco," I said, my voice steady but laced with tension. He turned, and the surprise on his face quickly morphed into a smirk. "What can I do for you?" he asked, feigning innocence. I could see the arrogance in his eyes. "You can stop seeing my wife," I said, my voice low and firm. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I delivered the ultimatum. "You're fired." The look on his face was priceless, a mixture of shock and amusement. "Fired from what? Cooking?" He laughed, dismissing me, but I pressed on, feeling a sense of empowerment. "From her life. You've crossed a line that you can't uncross." Marco shrugged, but I could see the flicker of concern in his eyes. I left the restaurant with a sense of purpose, knowing that I had taken the first step in reclaiming my life. Little did I know, the path ahead would lead me to a place I never thought I would go. The days following my confrontation with Marco were a blur of emotions. I returned home to Laura, who was still grappling with the aftermath of our confrontation. Her eyes were puffy from crying, and the weight of guilt hung heavily in the air. I wanted to feel sympathy for her, but all I could muster was a deep, aching betrayal. My heart felt like a shattered mirror, reflecting a million pieces of hurt and confusion. As we sat across from each other at the dining table, the silence was deafening. I watched her pick at her food, the gourmet meal she had once loved now a bitter reminder of everything that had transpired. Memories flooded my mind. Our first date at that fancy restaurant, the way she had savored each bite, her laughter ringing like music in my ears. Now it felt hollow, tainted by the knowledge that someone else had been enjoying that same joy with her. I thought about the love we had built over the years. We had shared so much, adventures, laughter, and dreams for the future. But now all those moments felt like a cruel joke. I could no longer look at her without seeing the betrayal etched into her features. The intimacy we once shared had been replaced by a chasm of mistrust. I was angry, yes, but I was also profoundly sad. Sad for the love that had been so easily tossed aside, sad for the life we had built that now felt like a house of cards, ready to collapse under the slightest breeze. Do you love him? I asked, the question escaping my lips before I could stop it. I needed to know. Her response was almost immediate, a shake of her head accompanied by fresh tears. No, it was a mistake. I was just caught up in the moment. A mistake. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. How could she dismiss it so easily? It felt like a slap in the face. I wanted to scream at her to make her understand the depth of her betrayal. But instead, I sat in silence, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. We spent the next few days in an uncomfortable limbo. Laura tried to talk about our relationship, to explain her feelings, but I found it hard to listen. Each time she reached out for my hand or tried to pull me into an embrace, I recoiled. I felt like a stranger in my own home, the walls closing in around me. The warmth of our shared life had turned cold, like a winter morning that refused to thaw. I started to isolate myself, retreating to my office for hours, poring over work to distract myself. I found solace in the mundane tasks, the spreadsheets and reports that required no emotional investment. But even in that, I could feel the weight of our broken marriage pressing down on me, a constant reminder of the betrayal lurking just beyond the door. At night, when I lay in bed, I struggled to find sleep. My mind was a cacophony of thoughts, images of Laura and Marco together, the laughter they shared, the meals they enjoyed. I replayed our happiest moments, trying to reconcile them with the reality of what had happened. It felt like being trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. One evening, I decided to confront Laura again. I needed to express how deeply her betrayal had affected me. I found her in the living room, staring blankly at the television, the flickering light casting shadows on her face. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but firm. She turned to me, her eyes red and swollen. "I know, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "I don't even know who you are anymore," I admitted, the words spilling out with raw honesty. "The woman I married would never have done this. You've changed." Tears streamed down her cheeks as she tried to explain again, to make me understand her feelings of loneliness, the pressures of her life that had led her to Marco. But I couldn't hear it. Each excuse felt like another dagger in my heart. I was drowning in a sea of betrayal, and I couldn't see a way out. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself caught in a cycle of anger and despair. The love I had once cherished was now a heavy burden, a reminder of what I had lost. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been foolish to trust her, to believe in the sanctity of our vows. The emotional fallout was overwhelming, and I felt like I was losing pieces of myself with every passing moment. In those dark nights when sleep eluded me, I began to formulate a plan. If I couldn't trust Laura, if our love had become something so easily broken, then I needed to take matters into my own hands. I wanted her to feel the weight of her choices, to experience the emptiness I felt every day. I didn't know yet how I would do it, but the idea of revenge began to take root in my mind. What started as a desperate need for control evolved into something more sinister. I wanted to ensure that she would never enjoy the pleasures of gourmet meals again, to strip away the joy that had once been a part of our lives. It was a dark thought, but in my heart, I felt justified. She had betrayed me, and now it was time for her to understand the consequences of her actions. The decision to fire Marco felt empowering, a way to reclaim a semblance of control in my life that had spiraled out of my grasp. But as the days passed, I realized that simply eliminating him from the equation wouldn't be enough to mend the rift in my marriage or satisfy the growing need for revenge that simmered within me. I needed to ensure that Laura felt the full weight of her betrayal, that she understood the consequences of her choices in a visceral way. I spent hours thinking about how to execute this plan. I couldn't simply ban gourmet meals from our lives. That wouldn't be a fitting punishment. No, I wanted to create a situation where every meal she consumed would be a reminder of what she had lost. I wanted her to experience the stark contrast between the culinary delights she once enjoyed and the mediocrity that would now define her dining experiences. I didn't have any culinary skills to speak of. My limited cooking repertoire consisted of basic meals that barely scraped by as edible. But that was exactly the point. I would take over the kitchen and serve her the most bland, uninspired dishes possible. I wanted her to miss the artistry of Marco's cooking, to long for the days when she could savor the flavors that had once danced on her palate. The next day, I decided to pay Marco a visit. I needed to confront him one last time, to make it absolutely clear that he was no longer welcome in our lives. I arrived at the restaurant, my heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and anxiety. As I walked through the door, the familiar sense of garlic, herbs, and roasted meats washed over me, reminding me of the life I once had. Marco was busy plating a dish when I approached him, his back turned. "Marco," I said, my voice steady. He turned around, the smirk on his face fading as he recognized me. "What do you want?" he asked, feigning indifference. "I want you to stay away from my wife, I mean it. You've caused enough damage already," I said, my voice low but firm. "And I don't want to see you anywhere near our home or our lives again." He shrugged, the arrogance still evident in his demeanor. "She made her choice, man. You can't control her." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "This isn't just about control. It's about respect. You've crossed a line and I won't let you get away." With it, I could see the flicker of unease in his eyes, and for a moment I felt a rush of satisfaction. I had taken a stand, and it felt good. As I left the restaurant, I felt a sense of purpose. I was determined to make Laura's life as bland and tasteless as her betrayal. I began to research recipes, poring over cookbooks and online tutorials, seeking the simplest, most uninspired meals I could find. I was determined to make her meals a reflection of the emptiness I felt inside. The first night I took over the kitchen, I decided to start with pasta. It was a simple dish, but I intended to strip it of any flavor. I boiled the noodles, poured them into a bowl, and added a bland drizzle of olive oil. No spices, no garlic, no parmesan, just plain, overcooked pasta. When I set the table, I felt a mix of anticipation and dread. I wanted to see her reaction, to gauge whether she would notice the stark difference. Laura walked in, her expression shifting from curiosity to confusion as she took in the sight of the plain pasta. "What's this?" she asked, eyeing the bowl warily. "Pasta," I replied, my tone flat. "I thought we could have a simple meal tonight." She hesitated, picking at the noodles with her fork. As she took her first bite, I watched her face closely, searching for any signs of disappointment. The blandness of the dish was undeniable, and I could see her trying to mask her reaction. "It's interesting," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I felt a sense of satisfaction wash over me. This was just the beginning. I was determined to make her meals increasingly disappointing, each one a reminder of what she had lost. I began to experiment with other dishes: burnt toast, flavorless steamed vegetables, and boiled chicken without seasoning. Each meal was a new opportunity to drive home the point that she had chosen poorly. As the days turned into weeks, the atmosphere in our home shifted. Laura's attempts to engage with me grew increasingly desperate, but I was resolute in my mission. I wanted her to understand that I had the power to alter her reality, to take away the joy she had once found in our shared meals. One evening, as I served her a particularly unappetizing casserole made with overcooked rice and canned vegetables, I noticed her expression falter. "Are you trying to make a point?" she asked, her voice tinged with frustration. I met her gaze, my expression unwavering. "I'm just cooking. It's what you wanted, right? Simplicity." She opened her mouth to protest, but then closed it again, the realization dawning on her. I could see the frustration and confusion in her eyes. This was no longer about just food. It was about power, control, and the consequences of her actions. I wanted her to feel the bitterness of regret with every bite, to understand that she had made a choice that had irrevocably changed our lives. With each passing meal, I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. I was no longer just the wronged husband. I was the architect of her culinary disappointment. And as I watched her struggle to mask her dissatisfaction, I realized that this was only the beginning of my revenge. As the weeks passed, my culinary campaign against Laura continued with a relentless fervor. Each meal became a calculated act of revenge, a way to ensure that she would forever associate the kitchen with disappointment and regret. I reveled in the power I had seized, finding solace in the fact that I could control at least this aspect of our lives. The joy I once derived from cooking had transformed into a weapon, and I wielded it with precision. Laura's initial attempts to engage with me during dinner faded into awkward silences. She would sit across from me, her expression a mixture of confusion and frustration as she picked at the bland, uninspired meals I served. I had become a master of mediocrity, crafting dishes that were not only devoid of flavor but also lacked any semblance of creativity. Overcooked vegetables, raw chicken, and flavorless rice became my staples, each meal a stark reminder of the betrayal that had shattered our lives. One evening, I decided to take it a step further. I had prepared a special dish, boiled potatoes with a drizzle of vinegar. As I set the table, I could barely contain my anticipation. I wanted to see her reaction, to witness the moment she realized that I was not just cooking for the sake of sustenance. I was making a statement. When Laura entered the dining room, I could see her eyes widen in disbelief. "What is this?" she asked, her voice a mix of incredulity and annoyance. "Boiled potatoes," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. "Thought I'd keep it simple tonight." She hesitated, lifting a forkful to her mouth. As she chewed, I watched her face closely. The look of disappointment was unmistakable. "This is bland," she said, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just like our relationship," I shot back, my words laced with bitterness. I could see the realization wash over her, the understanding that my culinary choices were a reflection of my emotional state. I had stripped away the joy of cooking, and in doing so, I had stripped away the remnants of our love. The following days saw a continuation of my culinary sabotage. I began to document each meal, taking photos of the uninspired dishes and sending them to my closest friend, Jake, for validation. "Look at this masterpiece," I would text, the sarcasm dripping from my words. Jake would respond with laughter, encouraging me to keep going. "You're a culinary genius of disappointment," he would say, and I would chuckle darkly, feeling a sense of camaraderie in my revenge. Laura, on the other hand, became increasingly frustrated. Her attempts to rekindle the spark in our relationship were met with my indifference. I could see her trying to cook for herself on occasion, but I made it clear that I wouldn't be joining her. I wanted her to feel the isolation of her choices, the loneliness that accompanied the betrayal she had inflicted upon me. One evening, while I was preparing yet another uninspired meal, Laura approached me in the kitchen. "Can we talk?" she asked, her tone tentative. I turned to face her, my expression unreadable. "About what, the food or your affair?" She flinched at my words, and I could see the hurt in her eyes. "I just want to understand why you're doing this," she said, her voice trembling. "Can't we try to work things out?" I felt a surge of anger and sadness, a mix of emotions that left me momentarily speechless. "Work things out? You think we can just pretend like everything is fine after what you did?" I snapped. "This is my way of showing you the consequences of your actions." Laura's face fell, and I could see the realization wash over her. She had thought that by apologizing and trying to reconnect, she could erase the pain of her betrayal. But I wasn't ready to forgive her so easily. The meals I prepared were a reflection of my inner turmoil, a way to express the hurt that words could not capture. As the weeks turned into a month, I continued my culinary campaign, each meal more disappointing than the last. I served her burnt toast with a side of water, flavorless oatmeal, and even a salad made entirely of wilted lettuce. With every bite, I could see the realization set in. She had lost not only the joy of gourmet meals, but also the love and warmth that had once defined our relationship. One night, I decided to take it a step further. I prepared a meal that I knew would be particularly unappetizing, a stew made with overcooked vegetables and bland broth. As I set the table, I could feel a sense of anticipation building within me. This was more than just a meal. It was a culmination of my emotions, a representation of the bitterness I felt toward her betrayal. When Laura sat down to eat, I watched her closely. She took a spoonful of the stew, her expression shifting from curiosity to disappointment as she chewed. "This is really bad," she said, trying to mask her reaction. I leaned back in my chair, a smirk creeping onto my face. "Just like our marriage," I replied, the words spilling out before I could stop them. The tension in the room was palpable, and for a moment I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. I had driven my point home, and I could see the impact of my actions weighing heavily on her. Laura pushed her plate away, frustration evident in her posture. "This isn't helping," she said, her voice strained. I leaned forward, my intensity rising. "Maybe it's time you realize what you've lost. You chose him over me, and now you have to live with the consequences." That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a mix of triumph and emptiness. I had succeeded in making her meals a source of disappointment, a reflection of the emotional void that now defined our relationship. But despite the satisfaction of my revenge, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was only digging myself deeper into a pit of resentment and hurt. The more I pushed Laura away, the more I realized that I was also pushing away the possibility of healing. But for now, the pain of betrayal was too fresh, and the need for revenge too strong. I had chosen this path, and I would see it through to the end. As I continued my culinary campaign against Laura, I found myself caught in a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The satisfaction I felt from executing my plan was beginning to fade, replaced by a creeping sense of emptiness. I had taken control of the kitchen, turning it into a battleground where I fought not only for revenge, but also for a sense of identity that had been stripped away from me. I was no longer just a husband. I was a man consumed by betrayal, wielding food as a weapon to express my pain. Each night, as I served her yet another unappetizing meal, I would watch her face closely, searching for signs of regret or remorse. But with each passing day, I found it increasingly difficult to maintain my resolve. The anger that had initially fueled my actions was starting to wane, replaced by a growing realization of the impact my revenge was having on both of us. I was not just punishing her, I was also punishing myself. One evening, as I prepared a particularly uninspired dish, overcooked pasta with a sprinkle of salt, I found myself lost in thought. I thought back to the early days of our relationship, the moments that had drawn us together. I remembered the way Laura's eyes sparkled with joy when I surprised her with a homemade dinner, the laughter we shared over wine and good food. Those memories felt like a distant dream, overshadowed by the betrayal that had shattered our lives. As I set the table, I felt a pang of guilt creep in. Was this really what I wanted? To turn our home into a place of bitterness and resentment? I could see the toll my actions were taking on Laura. She had grown quieter, more withdrawn, and the vibrant woman I had once loved was fading before my eyes. I felt a flicker of doubt about whether my revenge was truly justified. Was I losing her all over again, this time to my own bitterness? When Laura sat down to eat that night, I watched her closely, searching for any sign of the woman I once knew. She picked at the overcooked pasta, her expression a mix of confusion and sadness. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I met her gaze, the weight of her question heavy in the air. "Because you hurt me, Laura. You chose him over me. You broke my trust." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a moment I felt the walls I had built around my heart begin to crack. "I know I made a mistake," she said, her voice trembling, "but punishing me like this isn't going to fix anything." I felt a surge of anger at her words, but beneath it there was a flicker of understanding. She was right. My revenge wasn't healing the wounds, it was only deepening them. I wanted her to feel the pain of her choices, but in doing so, I was also ensuring that our love would never have a chance to heal. As I sat across from her, I realized that my quest for revenge had transformed into a cycle of pain. I was trapped in a loop of anger and sadness, unable to break free. I had wanted to teach her a lesson, but I was the one being taught. The emptiness that filled our home was a reflection of the emptiness in my heart. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing more than just my marriage. I was losing myself. The anger that had fueled my actions was now a heavy burden, and I found myself questioning whether revenge was truly the answer. I had thought that by punishing Laura, I could reclaim my sense of power, but instead, I had only succeeded in isolating myself further. In the days that followed, I began to reflect on what love and trust truly meant to me. I had always believed that love was about forgiveness, understanding, and growth. Yet here I was, holding onto my anger like a lifeline, unwilling to let go of the pain that had consumed me. I thought about the vows we had exchanged, the promises we had made to each other. Love was supposed to be a partnership, a journey we took together, not a battlefield where we fought to prove our worth. I found myself at a crossroads. I could continue down this path of revenge, allowing my bitterness to dictate my actions, or I could choose to let go of the anger and seek reconciliation. The thought of forgiveness felt foreign, almost impossible, but deep down, I knew that it was the only way forward. One evening, as I prepared yet another bland meal, I made a decision. I would confront Laura again, but this time it wouldn't be about anger or revenge. It would be about understanding and healing. I wanted to hear her side, to understand the reasons behind her actions, and to share my own feelings of betrayal. That night, I set the table with a new intention. I prepared a simple meal, a plain grilled chicken with steamed vegetables, but this time I approached it with care. I wanted to create a space for conversation, for honesty, and for the possibility of rebuilding the trust that had been shattered. When Laura entered the dining room, I could see the apprehension in her eyes. "What's this?" she asked, glancing at the meal before her. "Just a simple dinner," I replied, my tone softer than it had been in weeks. "Can we talk?" As we sat down to eat, I took a deep breath, ready to open up about my feelings and to hear hers in return. It was time to let go of the past and embrace the uncertainty of the future. Our love may have been bruised, but it was still there, waiting for the chance to heal. As we sat across from each other, the tension in the air felt palpable. I could see the uncertainty in Laura's eyes, but there was also a flicker of hope. I had spent so long wallowing in anger and resentment that it was time to break free from that cycle. I needed to move forward, not just for her sake, but for my own as well. The bitterness had consumed enough of my life. It was time to reclaim my happiness. "Laura," I began, my voice steady but soft, "I've been thinking a lot about what happened between us, about your affair and everything that followed. I've realized that my way of dealing with it, punishing you with bland meals, wasn't the answer. It only pushed us further apart." She looked down at her plate, her fingers nervously tracing the edge of her napkin. "I know I hurt you. I can't express how sorry I am for what I did. I was lost and I made a terrible mistake, but I never wanted to lose you." I felt a pang of empathy for her. We had both been lost in our own ways. "I want to understand why it happened," I said, my voice gentle. "What drove you to Marco? Was it something I did or didn't do?" Laura took a deep breath, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It wasn't about you. It was about me feeling overwhelmed. I thought I could escape the pressures of life, but I only ended up hurting the person I loved the most." Her voice cracked and I could see the sincerity in her eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you. I realize now how foolish I was." I nodded, absorbing her words. It was hard to hear, but it was also a step toward healing. "I can't pretend that what happened didn't hurt me deeply. I felt betrayed and angry, but holding onto that anger hasn't done either of us any good." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our conversation settling over us like a heavy blanket. I could feel the emotional distance between us beginning to close, and it was a relief. I knew that rebuilding trust would take time, but this was the first step. "I've spent so much time trying to punish you that I forgot what it means to love you," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. I want to work through this. I want to find a way back to each other. Her eyes widened and she reached across the table, taking my hand in hers. I want that too. I want to make things right. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild our relationship. As we held hands, I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. It wouldn't be easy, and I knew there would be challenges ahead, but for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were on the same team again. We were two people who had stumbled, but were willing to learn from our mistakes. The next few weeks were a delicate dance of rebuilding. We began to communicate more openly, discussing our fears and insecurities. I started to cook again, but this time, there was a renewed sense of purpose behind my meals. I experimented with flavors, rediscovering the joy of cooking as a way to connect with Laura rather than a weapon to hurt her. We even started to recreate some of our favorite dishes together, laughing as we stumbled through new recipes. The kitchen became a place of collaboration rather than conflict, and I realized that food was not just sustenance. It was a way to express love and intimacy. One evening, as we prepared a meal together, I looked over at Laura, her laughter filling the room like music. The warmth that had been missing for so long began to seep back into our lives. I felt a sense of gratitude wash over me for the chance to rebuild what had been broken. As we sat down to enjoy the meal we had prepared together, I raised my glass to toast. To new beginnings, I said, my heart swelling with hope. To new beginnings, Laura echoed, her smile brightening the room. In that moment, I realized that while the scars of betrayal would always be a part of our story, they didn't have to define us. We had a choice, either to dwell in the pain of the past or to embrace the possibility of a brighter future. Together, we chose the latter. Looking forward, I envisioned a path filled with challenges, but also with opportunities for growth. We would continue to navigate the complexities of our relationship, learning to trust each other again, one meal at a time. It wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for the journey ahead. As I took a bite of the meal we had created together, I tasted not just the flavors of the food, but also the promise of love and resilience. We were rebuilding, and with each meal, each shared moment, we were creating a new foundation for our lives together. This time, it felt like we were cooking for a future filled with hope, understanding, and love, a future worth fighting for. And maybe, just maybe, we would find our way back to the joy we once shared, one delicious bite at a time.